I'm Jim Coyne, also known as Coyne the Round. You can publish almost any manuscript somewhere if you don't care where. Here's something that some scientists actually got published when they were testing the limits of just how far they could go in getting nonsense into print. The number of scientific papers being published doubles every 9 years. PLOS One, the open access mega journal, where I'm one of the academic editors, accounted for a paltry 25,000 of the well over 1.5 million peer-reviewed scientific papers published last year. There are new journals popping up all the time. Many are legitimate, but some are predatory journals. They beg you to submit a paper, quickly accept the paper after you send it, but then you get a hefty bill for a publication fee they didn't even mention. If you fall for the scam, it's unlikely that your paper will be indexed anywhere where someone could find it with a search engine. Even when published in legitimate journals, many papers don't get access very often or the attention they deserve. Authors assume that the journal impact factors are a good predictor of how their papers will do, but they're actually poor estimates of how much attention a typical paper will get. Journal impact factors are driven by a small number of outlier papers getting unusually high number of citations. The rest do not nearly as well. It's actually getting a lot harder to get into quality journals. Editors are overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of papers being submitted. Many of the manuscripts are of low quality, shouldn't have been sent out in the first place. Many obviously would not fit with a journal's particular intended audience. I don't understand it, but a lot of authors don't think before they pick a journal to submit their manuscript. It makes it hard on editors and reviewers. As an editor, I'm certainly not alone in finding that I can't always enlist the top reviewers I'd like to review particular papers because the candidates are already overwhelmed by other requests that don't fit with their interests and have stopped paying attention to requests for reviews. So increasingly, journals resort to what are called desk rejections. The editor quickly sends out a rejection letter that thanks the editor for sending the paper, expresses hope that the author will consider the journal in the future, but delivers a summary judgment that this manuscript is, quote, insufficient interest to the readership of the journal. Bye. For some highly competitive journals in some fields, the rate of desk rejections without review, is about 40% or more. Harried editors often don't even read manuscripts, but deliver their judgments based solely on a screening of the cover letter, the titles, and the abstracts of papers. I'm asking you as an author, just how much time do you put in these 3 tools for getting your manuscript out for review before you hit the submit button? Take cover letters. In the past, a lot of us had a stock letter on file. We could get a new letter composed before I got through a single espresso. We'd simply plug in the title of the manuscript. Dear editor, enclosed please find a manuscript, blah, 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 which we wish to submit for review and possible publication in your fine journal. We look forward to your response. Thank you for your consideration. No, man, only dead people and Shakespearean actors talk that way in native English. If you say hereby, you identify yourself as a non-native speaker. And who knows, the editor and reviewers might look for other evidence that your manuscript isn't in the best of English, and not only that, it's sloppily put together. I write a lot with European addresses for the corresponding author, and even I sometimes get suggestions I should find a native speaker before I resubmit my paper. Until recently, titles and abstracts would also be left to the last minute, just before you're ready to submit the manuscript. But in the current competitive climate, leaving them to an afterthought can be a big mistake. It misses some key options for increasing the likelihood your paper will get out for review. Why should an editor send your manuscript out for review?
Because my PhD grant is running out and I need another publication to set the date for my thesis defense.
Because the dean told my chairperson that he wants us to publish more papers in BMJ and JAMA.
Because I'm coming up for promotion and I really need a couple more publications.
No, don't confuse your desperation with the interests of the editor in her journal.
Because I asked a good research question, I gathered the data that gave an interesting answer, and I wrote the paper up, so that should appeal to the journal's leadership.
Well, excellent. As an editor, I'd love to get such a manuscript, but how would I know that it was so valuable? Good papers don't sell themselves. You have to alert editors to the merit. You got to let them know that they're coming in your cover letter.
All the editor has to do is read my manuscript. She'll be impressed.
Right, but editors are busy and underpaid or unpaid people. You have to get their attention. Resign yourself to a lot of good papers only get quickly screened, not even read by the editor because the editor doesn't recognize what they're holding. I always advise authors that when they write anything, they keep in mind, even visualize a likely reader. With cover letter, it's the editor. Think of me, a highly distractible old man, squirming in front of his computer, reading your email, with a full bladder, a need for another espresso, and certainly better things to be doing. You have to catch my attention before I make a quick judgment, and I'm out of there. I want to do my part, but I don't have much time, particularly when I'm being overwhelmed by inappropriate submissions. As an editor, I work for free, and you don't have my attention. You have to earn it and satisfy me to keep it. You have to justify it.
That's outrageous. I put all this work into a manuscript and I get it rejected without anyone taking a serious look.
Yep, publishing scientific papers is a rough and unfair game. Sometimes it really seems the dice are loaded and the cards are marked. But if you figure out the rules, you are more likely to succeed. You can do what you can to influence the editor to send your paper out for review, but you have to make a pitch for your manuscript. You have to stand out in your immediate first contact with the editor. Over the coming months, I'm going to be offering a number of short web-based courses. Future ones will concentrate on what to do when you receive reviews back from your manuscript, hopefully revise and resubmit, or when it gets rejected, should you appeal or just go on to another journal. Another course will focus on the importance of promoting your paper after it gets published. That's so important these days, and many people have the idea that that's when the real work begins. Another course will be thinking long-term about developing yourself as a writer of science. You know, you've been trained as a researcher, but researchers are writers, and it's a lifelong task of getting better at writing, just as it's a lifelong task of acquiring new skills as a researcher. But this particular course that I'm talking about now will be 5 one-hour webinars, Writing High-Impact Papers, a Strategic Approach to Getting Your Manuscript Out for Review. The course is not about writing a well-structured paper in the best English, carefully formatted according to some publication manual. That still matters a lot, but it's not enough to get published. The first 1-hour session will be Good Science is Not Enough, Getting Your Paper Out for Review. I'll provide you with an understanding of the nature of the contemporary scientific publishing scene, how it's rapidly changing, what's probably going to remain constant, so you can develop strategies to increase the likelihood of getting your paper out for review. There are lots of forces in play, but one of the most important is the digitalization of scientific publishing, the internet taking on an increasingly important role. People like Richard Smith, the former editor of BMJ, talk about the death of the medical journal as we have known it. Others talk about the death of the bound volume, the death of the paper journal, and the death of the credibility of the journal impact factor. Some of us are really waiting for that to happen. There's a little bit of truth to all of these changes, but to paraphrase Mark Twain, reports of these deaths are mostly greatly exaggerated. Sure, authors have to contend with rapid change in the publishing of science. They have new options and new challenges. They face sometimes intense competition in getting their work published and the attention it deserves. But at the same time, some things remaining the same or they change slowly. For instance, we know the journal impact factor is losing whatever validity it ever had, but to some people who matter a lot in our lives, in our success, it still matters greatly. Just tell the dean that you've decided to ignore journal impact factors in publishing. Just try to educate your chair about how invalid they are. It's as useless as my lecturing my chair. The strategy for getting your paper out for review is that I'll describe in this course starts with an understanding of the rapidly changing current scene. We'll cover choices like open access versus traditional paywall journals, altmetrics versus traditional journal impact factors, and even innovations like preprint repositories, which are increasingly an attractive place to put your papers even before they go out to the journals. Think of this. You can put your preprint into a depository, get people from around the world to give feedback on it, and then, only then, decide where you're going to publish it. But better check with journals' policies before you begin all this, because some of them aren't yet on board with it. But most importantly, we'll arrive at an understanding of the intense competition for credibility and prestige that traditional and non-traditional journals are engaged in. Listen up. Editors of journals select papers to publish based on the likelihood that publishing them will bring the journal the attention it seeks and promote the particular reputation or branding it wants to secure. Basically, to get your paper out for review, your strategy has to be to appeal to editors and their journals need to secure a competitive advantage by publishing some papers and avoiding others. Some journals want to avoid what they call another brick in the wall. Journals differ in how much they weigh claims of being newsworthy and innovative at the expense of what is really robust and trustworthy and enduring in the contribution that it makes. Journals differ in the extent to which they practice the so-called Pink Floyd rejection, turning away manuscripts without review that are solid, well-done science, even well-written, but they're not dramatic. They're only another brick in the wall. But think about it. Most well-done work isn't necessarily going to be innovative and breakthrough. Well-diced science has a solid foundation of bricks in the walls that it builds on. And I think we need to be suspicious when we hear the claim too often that papers published in a particular journal are radically innovative and breakthroughs. We may need to move on to other journals that value transparently reported, well-done science instead of hype and hokum. And fortunately, there are quality satisfying options, and I'll help you identify them and make decisions between them and the more vanity journals, as we call them. The second session will be picking a journal for your work, a tailored approach. If you pick the wrong journal, it reduces the likelihood your paper will go out for review or will get the attention it deserves if it somehow gets published. Picking the right journal can be the first step in avoiding immediately getting desk rejection. Sorry, but your papers are insufficient readership to this particular journal's readership. That can be an avoidable problem. But the important second step is that you pitch to the editor in your cover letter exactly how and why your manuscript will be of interest to its readership. And for that, you have to figure out what the readership is of that journal. And you'll need some tools to figure that out. Beyond that, there's so many other choices. What's the advantage of open access versus paywall traditional journals? Is it important to you that anybody anywhere in the world can access your work even if they're not going through a university library? Think about the third world. Think about clinicians in the field. But will you lose respect if you publish in an open access journal? I hear that question sometimes, and we'll need to have a definitive answer. We'll talk about handy, freely available general tools for selecting a journal, like Jane. With Jane, simply going to the website, you plug in your title, you paste in your abstract or both, and come up with some reasonable suggestions, a range of possible journals that fits with what you're doing. But we'll also talk about other tools to tailor, personalize your choices in terms of what else you're publishing at that time and how you can get up-to-date statistics about the last paper you published in a particular journal. We'll talk about some considerations like the obvious one. Should you go for the highest impact journal? I think a lot of people have said traditionally, of course. But let me give you an example. I've written a lot of articles about psychological adaptation to cancer. Because that's an interdisciplinary topic, I get a lot of choices. I can pitch to psychological researchers, I can aim to more specialized psycho-oncology audiences, or even prestigious journals where I reach the oncologists themselves. A former postdoc of mine published in a journal called CA, a cancer journal for clinicians. It had an impact factor of over 100 at the time. Wow, I'll bet that you and not even your department chair has ever published in a journal with an impressive impact factor of 100. Impressed? You shouldn't be. In this session, I'll explain why that was a bad idea. We will talk about what your strategy should be when your manuscript gets rejected at your first choice of a journal and you're going on to your next choice. How do you make a decision? Do you know that journals increasingly require that if your paper gets rejected first elsewhere, you have to submit the reviews that you got and responses that you made, and you have to be real clear on how you revise your manuscript. A third session will be capturing the editor's attention with effective cover letters. Cover letters become so important. It's such a pity that so many authors ignore the opportunity they provide. Now, the other two tools that you have for getting your paper out for review, the title and the abstract, they serve other functions beyond persuading the editor of why they should send your paper out for review. And they're going to live on after your paper's been accepted, and they can come back to haunt you if they're not well put together. In contrast, the purpose of a cover letter is pretty much exhausted when the editor makes a decision about your paper. You need to be strategic. Recognize that a cover letter is informal, sort of like sitting down with an editor at a conference over a beer. You try to impress the editor, try to interest the editor in your work, but there's no enduring record of what you say. The cover letter either persuades the editor to send your paper out for review or it doesn't. In either case, it's going to be largely forgotten. Crafting a good cover letter means being clear, though, about why you even did a study. I'm amazed that so many junior academics don't even have a clear idea why they did a study that they could communicate in a cover letter.
I wrote this paper because my advisor had some data sitting around that she wanted me to write up.
Yeah, right. Just try to persuade an editor with that compelling reason. Sadly, authors very often find they need to get clear for the first time about why they did a study, why they wrote a paper, when they're in the final stage of explaining it to an editor in a cover letter. We'll need to work on that. We will see how to refine an idea from a single word, a single descriptor, to a soundbite, to a short passage explaining why the manuscript is important. Why it is important that you wrote it, what's distinctive about what you did and found, and how the world, or at least your field, will be a bit different having your report available. The fourth session will be avoiding the boring and the undiscoverable. Effective titles. Titles should not be left to an afterthought. After they serve their purpose in persuading the editor to send your paper out for review, titles serve important functions in people being able to find your paper and being motivated to click on its abstract or even download it. Your paper has to have a title that grabs the editor's interest, but then it has to be suitable for drawing readers in when it later appears on the internet. You have to make sure that your title is neither boring nor leave your paper undiscoverable. When it comes to thinking up catchy titles that will draw readers into finding your paper, please avoid cliches. Think of the editor like myself who has to read cliches over and over again. Here's an exercise that you can try. Take a cliche like size matters, or Back to the Future, or Lost in Translation. Call up Google Scholar on your computer and type it in quotation mark. Say size matters. Look at how many papers it identifies and how likely it would be that yours would be lost in that mess. This brings us to another key point that should be emphasized. When we make a pitch to an editor that our manuscript should go out for review, one thing we should keep in mind is the journal's interest in getting attention in the social media to papers and the journal itself. Yep, journals are concerned with social media. AAAS, the American Academy for the Advancement of Science that publishes the prestigious journal Science, has a team of 20 full-time staff who simply promote and monitor articles full-time in social media. The fifth and final session will be No Hype, Effective but Responsible Abstracts. Many abstracts are absolutely horrible, useless, and uninformative. I don't know why authors wrote them, and certainly I don't understand why editors and reviewers ever let them get into print. Too often abstracts don't give any of the key details of the research question that a study addressed, how the study was done, the specifics of results that were obtained, how they're to be interpreted, and most importantly, how the world, or at least the field, is different as a result of the author having these results to report. We'll spend some time in the final class on analyzing some terrible examples of abstracts and how they might have been turned into good ones, and how your abstract can be good from the start. Of course, it's always good to check with specific journals about their requirements for abstracts, because these requirements differ very much from journal to journal, and they may suddenly change, even from the beginning of you starting to write your paper to when you finish it up. Check with the journal. And I say responsible in the title of this session, in addition to effective, because a lot of untrustworthy reports of science in the media start with bad abstracts. Hype and distortion in the media starts with hype and distortion in abstracts. I've blogged about some instances where distortions in abstracts actually led to people dying. But mostly distortions in abstracts just lead to misrepresentations of science. Did you know that research has shown that particular misleading reports of science in the media can often be traced back to distortions in abstracts? Apparently, many people only read the abstracts, and specifically, the author's distortions become important about what the study means for health and human welfare. Fortunately, there's a lot of guidance available, but no one seems to use it. For instance, there's a so-called consort for abstracts, some consolidated standards that are captured in a checklist that can be used to evaluate abstracts before the paper is sent out for review. But no one seems to use it. We will talk about using it, and we'll show how it can be adapted to guide not only the end result that you send out for review, but actually writing your abstract. So there you have it, the broad outlines of a 5-session course. I promise you the course will get you thinking about things you haven't given enough thought to, that you recognize opportunities and challenges that you weren't previously aware, and it'll give you some strategies how to make the best use of your new insights in getting your paper out for review and ultimately accepted. So click on this link and it'll take you to where you can sign up for the 5-session course at a special early bird rate. And if you're not ready to make that commitment, sign up for the first session and still get an introductory rate that won't be around later. Believe me, you won't be disappointed and you'll learn a lot.